Hi everyone, I'm super happy to be here. My name is Stefanie, and today I'm going to be talking about my passion topic, which is sustainability in tech, and how we as people working in tech can balance the progress of all the new technologies with the responsibility that we have. And if I had to summarize my talk in one image, it would be that one. I don't know if you've seen it, but this meme popped up on my LinkedIn feed, I think in the beginning of June, and Apple had just released their Vision Pro VR headset. And everybody was like, oh, and here's about spatial design, and this is how it works, and yada, yada, yada. And at the same time, there were these raging wildfires in Canada, and all the smoke was blowing down into the US, and many major cities were, in this orange, hazy smoke. People couldn't go outside, and I thought, like, okay, now, great, VR headset, but don't we have bigger problems to solve here? And today I want to talk about how we can feel a little bit less like we're part of that meme. Before I start, let me just quickly introduce myself and share a little bit about how I came to talk about this sustainability topic. My story with sustainability started back in 2015. When I was working as an IT consultant, and that work took me to Costa Rica, where I really fell in love with nature, and I thought, okay, we need to protect this precious planet that we have. So I started becoming more sustainable in my personal life, but obviously our impact as individuals is limited. So it kind of swapped over into my work. And the second big event was actually this year when I was walking the Camino de Santiago in Portugal and Spain. So 2 weeks hiking with a backpack. And the image there is me at 9 a.m. in the morning. It was already blazing hot, so this is why I'm wearing my wet towel to cool down, because like the whole trip was really too hot for the month of May, and that really told me again, like, okay, this whole problem we're having with climate change is getting worse and worse, and we need to do something. So when I came back, I started my own gig where I want to take my part in developing more sustainable products. And this is also why I'm speaking here, because as a person, I can only work on 1 or maybe 2 projects at a time. But if I can inspire you to think a little bit more about sustainability, then I think we can make a big impact as people in tech. Now, when I talk about sustainability, what do I mean? For this, I brought you the UN Sustainable Development Goals that were published in 2015, and that the UN says that the world should achieve by 2030. And I'm putting them on here because oftentimes we think that sustainability is mostly about the environment, but it's much more than that. Obviously, we have climate change and protecting biodiversity, but sustainability also has a social aspect of, let's say, reducing inequalities or providing decent work for everybody or caring about mental health. And I will use these goals throughout the talk to illustrate some of the points I'm making. So we can talk about different aspects of sustainability. But since we need to take care of all of these aspects, I still wanted to start with the environment. And usually I would put on this image and tell you about how all the data centers and the networks use a lot of energy, and then all the devices that we use end up in some landfills in Africa, maybe. But since the theme of this track that I'm speaking in is the buzzing technologies, I thought, like, hey, why don't we make this talk today about some of these buzzing technologies and look a little bit closer at the sustainability impact they are having, the positive and the negative. Now, let's start with a few numbers to get a grasp of the problem. So I looked up the, let's say, carbon footprint, or how much greenhouse gases the internet or information communication technology, ICT, has. And there are different numbers ranging from 2 to 7% at this time, depending on whom you ask. I think the 7% is from the EU. And now you might say, okay, that's not even 10%, so it's probably not that big. To put it into context, the aviation industry is at about 2 or 3%, and industrial animal farming is about 5%. And we talk so much about how we need to eat less meat and fly less, but I think that we're not talking enough about what the internet does in terms of CO2 emissions. And obviously, everything digital is growing and growing. So there are estimates out there that by 2030, so 7 years from now, we're already at 13% of global emissions only caused by the internet. And if the internet were a country, by that time, it would be the second largest polluter after China. So this is indeed a big problem. Let's look at some technologies, and the first thing that might come to mind is the impact of Bitcoin mining, because that's been talked about for a few years already. And I looked it up, and there is actually one study that looks at the impact of Bitcoin mining in 2022, I believe. And it's, in terms of percentage, not so much, with 0.19. But then again, if we compare it with a country, is as much as the whole country of Greece. And maybe Bitcoin mining is not the most buzzing technology at the moment, but we can think about AI. And I was trying to find some numbers on AI, but the problem is we don't know at this point. And there are two reasons for that. The first one is that research obviously always takes a little bit of time to get to the numbers and then do their estimations. And the second point is that both the AI companies as well as the chip manufacturers are not really open about how much energy these chips used in AI and machine learning are actually consuming. But what I brought you are some numbers for one LLM, that's GPT-3, so the predecessor of the ChatGPT we're probably all using by this time. And this study looked at the training phase of this model, so it's not the usage if we write a query and get an answer, but only the training part. And that alone has produced 550 tons of CO2 equivalent. That would be 550 return flights between New York and San Francisco. And the second problem that we have here is actually the water consumption. So obviously, the data centers need a lot of water to be cooled. And another study estimated that at 3.5 million liters of water just for the training of GPT-3, based on the assumption that it was trained in the US. Had it been trained in Asia, and we don't know, it would have been closer to 5 million. And not all of this water can be reused because some just evaporates as steam. And then it's not there for people who need it or for agriculture. And this world already has a water shortage, and it's getting bigger and bigger because of technology. But as I said, there's more when we look at other aspects of sustainability. One of them that I would like to talk about is in terms of inequalities and also biases. And the example here I brought is the most visual that I could find. So probably many of you had already heard talks about ethics in AI. I just want to show you a different facet, and this is quite recent. So when the Barbie movie came out, BuzzFeed published an article that is now deleted, but you can still find a YouTube video about it, where they used Midjourney and kind of asked the question, okay, if Barbie came from different countries, how would she look like? And this is the result. So we see a very beautiful Barbie from Colombia, but I don't know who's ever been to Colombia. I have. And when I was on the bus there, I was probably the only person with this light skin on that bus. So this is another form of colorism where we say, okay, the lighter the skin, the more beautiful. The German Barbie obviously wears like a Nazi-ish uniform. What else should she wear? But the most or the worst example that I saw was the Barbie from South Sudan who just wears a machine gun. And yeah, for me, that's just a very visual example how our use of AI tools really prolongs problems and biases like colorism or racism. Another topic when it comes to the social and economic side is that of decent work. So we, as the users of AI, we're talking a lot about, okay, and will this steal my job, and what happens, and how can I use it? But the other side of the problem is that oftentimes really cheap workers are used to help train these models. So Time recently published an article that they found out that OpenAI used Kenyan workers to basically train ChatGPT to not give racist or in other ways inappropriate answers. And they were earning just $2 per hour, which is not a living wage. And we also need to take that into account, again, when it comes to inequalities that, say, OpenAI or we, as we're using these LLMs, are making a lot of money out of it, and the people who work on it to actually make it work, they're not earning enough money. To go away from AI, I also have another recent example when we are talking about virtual reality, to get back to the Apple Vision Pro. So when it came out, again, I thought like, okay, what can we do with it? What are the use cases? And I went to Apple's website, and that's where this image is from. And yeah, this is about gaming. The other ones were about, zooming with your grandparents and on your living room wall, or just doing work with your VR headsets. But I wondered, is this technology solving problems that we haven't solved with existing technology yet? And then if we again come to the negative aspects of these technologies, I put up some of the SDGs here. So that's the abbreviation for Sustainable Development Goals. And we can think, for example, about mental health. And we can ask ourselves, do we really need more immersion in the digital world? Like, coming out of the pandemic, everybody was talking about Zoom fatigue and that we don't want to sit in front of our laptops and talk to people the whole day. And now we're maybe supposed to do that with a VR headset. I'm not sure about that. If you're thinking about the $3,500 price tag, and more if, like me, you need glasses, and probably many of you also do, isn't this capitalizing on existing inequalities? So who can even afford such a device? Maybe the top 5% of earners in Germany, or 1% worldwide? I don't know. And the next question is, do we as consumers really need to buy another gadget? We already have our laptops and our tablets and our smartphones and our smartwatches, and now we need this headset. So more and more stuff lying around that needs to be disposed of at some point. And last of all, coming back to the energy and climate impact, if we think of all the data that needs to be processed, if we have these huge 3D images, this is again a lot of energy use and therefore climate impact. So what can we do now? When we think about all these negative impacts, what we can do is actually try to use these technologies for building digital products that have a positive impact. And you probably know the concept of the footprint. So we probably also know that we as a person, we have a CO2 footprint. So that's how much CO2 we produce, or our lifestyle produces in a year, let's say. But the other part of that concept is the handprint. So that's the positive impact. For example, if we think about a product, how much CO2 helps our product reduce in the lives of the users. And as said, we can put that concept in terms of our product, and then if we don't want to measure it, we can also make it wider than just emissions and think about all the other aspects of sustainability, for example, in the social part. And obviously what we want to do, we want to reduce the footprint, so make it as small as possible. But then the thing that has even more impact is to increase the handprint, so the positive impact of our products. And to illustrate that, I brought you a few examples of using the technologies, VR and AI, that I just talked about for a positive impact, again, in terms of the SDGs. And for VR, the most critical use case that I see where I say, hey, this is a positive impact, is oftentimes education. And this is an example of a VR headset by Also VR. It's a little bit older, and they use it specifically for surgical training. So if a surgeon needs to learn a new skill or practice a new procedure, he doesn't have to do it on a patient or maybe even like a model of a patient. He can or she can train that in VR. And I think this is an example where the positive might outweigh the negative impacts of, yeah, let's say, building this VR product. If we stay in the healthcare field and look at AI, you might have heard of that 2020 there was a study, and even Google was involved, where they found out that AI can better detect some cancers in comparison to humans. And now we even have an app for that. So the Fraunhofer Institute, they have built an app where you can diagnose skin cancer. So you can scan the moles on your skin, and then the app tells you, is it probably cancer or not? And this really speeds up diagnosis. So you don't have to wait 3 months for a doctor's appointment. That would also be a very positive case in my view. And to move on from the health field, another example from AI would be in the area of farming. So there is an Indian startup, and what they do is they use AI to predict how much fertilizers farmers should use to have more yield, so produce more food, and at the same time use less fertilizers, which are also problematic for the environment in terms of carbon emission, but also in terms of what they do to the soil. Now, once we talked about how to build the right products with the technology, let's talk a little bit about how to build our products right. And I always say that in all the parts of our product development process, we can really make sure to include sustainability. So when we're talking about the product ideas, that would have been the examples I just showed you, but then also in the design phase, we can think about who are we designing for. In the development phase, we can think about how we build these products, for example, to be more energy efficient. And then we can also include some things in the process of how we work. To give you a few tangible examples, I brought some tools that I personally really like that can help us keep an eye on sustainability. And the first thing would be in the product case, or thinking about the business model of our product. So maybe you know the business model canvas. It's the upper part of this graphic, which is like a one-page business plan where you can describe your product and how you produce it and how you sell it and what costs and revenue streams there are. And what they did here, they just made it the sustainable business model canvas by just adding 2 more boxes so that people start thinking about what are the eco-social costs and the eco-social benefits. So this is where you then, for example, can calculate CO2 emissions or write down what positive or negative impacts your product or business model can have on society, to really say, okay, yes, this is what we want to build, and maybe this is not the best application. Again, when we come to design, another nice tool that we don't need to invent a new tool, but can just adapt one. You probably have heard of user personas, and we can also adapt them to non-users, so the people that are affected by the products we build. In this example, it might be a child worker. In the other example I talked about earlier, like the Kenyan workers training the AI model, we could look at them and see, okay, what are their needs and how can we support them and protect them? You can even go one step further to make it non-human personas. So we can think about, okay, what about nature? What are nature's needs? Or maybe it's the river that our factory is next to, or the bees. I don't know. So just giving us a different perspective of whom our products are impacting. Another nice tool that I like to use in the design phase when it comes to the topic of inclusion, so more on the social side of sustainability, is the Inclusive Innovation Playbook. This is not only for digital products, so you can also use it for organizational topics or events, and it gives you a lot of nice tools and practices that you can use to make your whatever you're working on more inclusive. And then if we go to the development phase next, something I brought for you if you're especially interested in AI. So there's not so much out there yet, because obviously AI has just recently become such a hype for everyone. But there is a nice product called Sustain. It's a project by Algorithm Watch, and they really focus on how to make AI more sustainable. And they published this spring, I think, these guidelines that look at the planning and the data collection and the development and the implementation of AI models and product, and really give you checklists, not only for the environmental aspects, but also for, let's say, the social and ethical aspects of AI. So if you're working with AI, definitely take a look there. Another thing that has come out recently, like I think it was officially announced this week, are the Web Sustainability Guidelines. So you probably know the accessibility guidelines, and now we have something similar for sustainability as well. And they not only go into web development, but also UX and product strategy and even business strategy. So I would say whatever kind of product you're working on, you can have a look there to just get some good guidelines on what you should think about and how you can, for example, also optimize the energy use of your digital product. And those guidelines are based on some principles that are written down in the Sustainable Web Manifesto. I really like them because they give us like a high-level overview, and they're saying like, okay, it should be clean, it should be open, but it should also be regenerative. So that's basically the positive handprint of the products that we are developing. And again, it's called Web Manifesto, but we can use it for all kinds of digital products, I believe. And if I had to summarize this talk in one quote, I would pick this one. It's one of my favorite designers. He's also an agency owner, Mike Montero from the US. And he tells us that we are responsible for the work that we put out into the world, and that we should choose to leave the world better than we found it. If you say, okay, sounds great, now how do I do that? The last thing that I would like to share with you is my personal framework, how I make decisions what to work on. Because I believe that apart from deciding how we spend our money and for whom we vote, we also have a big choice in deciding on what we work on. And my little framework here has 4 steps. And the first one is to realign with our own values. So what is important to me? Maybe it's one or more of the sustainable development goals. Maybe you're into better education or better health or protecting the climate. But maybe it's also only, or not only, but maybe it's just something like providing a good life for your family. But thinking about what is important for you personally really can help you make decisions. And the second step is, at the same time, the easiest, but sometimes also the hardest, rejecting unsustainable projects. So I personally would never work for an oil company, maybe, or a tobacco company. So I would just say no to these things. And this might become a bit harder if you're working in a company already that is starting a new project and you don't want to leave the workplace as the first thing that you do, but then we can at least ask questions. The third step, what we should all do when we're building digital products, is to reduce the negative impact in terms of energy, but also in terms of the negative social impacts that we've seen. And the biggest step would be increasing the handprint, so reinforcing positive change. And I believe that the Sustainable Development Goals can really guide us in thinking about, okay, what positive change should we reinforce? If you say, okay, this sounds interesting and sustainability in tech is something that I want to learn more about, a few recommendations to end this with. The good thing is that we're at Code Talks here, and we have some more super interesting talks that go into the direction of sustainability. Thanks to Hila, who created this track with a big focus on this. And 2 more things that I would like to recommend to you is, first of all, today's talk by Samina, and she's talking about AI, how to develop useful and unbiased AI. So again, increasing the handprint and reducing the footprint, if you want to put it that way. I've seen the talk, and it's really, really great. And the second talk that I haven't seen, but I'm really curious to watch tomorrow, would be Tobias, and he is going to talk about how to use AI to fix the carbon markets. So another application that sounds really promising on the positive side. A different thing, if you're not at a conference, that I always recommend if you're interested, join a community of change makers. So there are many, many out there already for different topics. If you're into UX, if you're into climate action, or if you say, okay, AI is a big topic for me, then I would maybe recommend All Tech is Human, because they have a really big focus on ethical AI as well. And most of these communities have a Slack or a Discord where you can really meet other people and find out about new resources and events like that. And if you say, okay, this is maybe not the right thing for me, or I want something else, I don't like communities, another thing I have for you is my personal resource library. So I have to admit that I'm a bit of a collector, which is not the most sustainable thing you can do. But again, I try to increase the handprint of the whole thing. And yeah, I'm sharing the resources that I collected on all these different topics of sustainability, be it environmental, be it social. And yeah, you can just look that up and find these communities, but also books and podcasts and online courses. And yeah, the resources I shared. Tagged by the different SDGs, for example. Yeah. And with that, the only thing that is left to say, if you want to connect and get in touch, I'll be here at the conference, so we can also have a coffee, a chat about these topics. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn at my name, and where I also talk about these things. And with that, I just want to say thank you for listening, and I'll be here if you have any questions.